Picture waking up at dawn to the earth-shaking roar of 10 bulldozers forming a perfect trap around your family farm, blocking every gate, every road, every escape route while your terrified horses scream and your chickens flee in panic. Standing there with a megaphone like some deranged dictator, Bethany Clearwater, my HOA president, shrieking about emergency health violations while diesel fumes choke the morning air, and my 12-year-old daughter watches our animals suffer behind a wall of yellow steel. This psychotic woman thought she'd found the perfect way to steal my grandfather's 47-acre heritage farm. She had no clue I'd just been quietly appointed to a government position that gave me the power to destroy her entire corrupt empire with a single phone call. What would you do if some power-drunk Karen literally held your family's livelihood hostage? Drop your location below. I need to know how many of you are dealing with these HOA tyrants. Let me take you back to how this nightmare started. 3 months earlier, I inherited this 47-acre slice of heaven from my grandfather in rural Tennessee. Third-generation organic vegetables, free-range chickens, and heritage breed horses that had been grazing these pastures since before most of these suburban McMansions were even a developer's wet dream. The morning mist still rolled over our fields like clockwork, carrying the sweet smell of hay mixed with my first cup of coffee. You could hear the gentle clucking of Rhode Island Reds scratching in the dirt, the soft snorting of our Clydesdales as they shook dew from their manes. Running my calloused hands along those worn wooden fence posts my grandfather built, that rough, weathered texture told stories of decades of honest work and zero tolerance for nonsense. My boots crunched across the gravel driveway every morning at 5:30, same routine Grandpa followed for 40 years. I was rebuilding my life here after a divorce that left me with more debt than a college freshman and less trust in people than a used car salesman. Just me and my 12-year-old daughter Maple, trying to make this heritage farm profitable while keeping 3 generations of family traditions alive. Here's where the universe decided to mess with us. Recent county rezoning, the kind of bureaucratic shuffle that happens when developers start throwing money around, meant part of our property technically fell within the new Whispering Pines Estates HOA boundary. Not that we asked to join their suburban kingdom of matching mailboxes and identical driveways. Enter Bethany Clearwater. Picture a real estate shark crossed with a mall cop, given way too much authority and a clipboard. 50-something, with blonde hair so perfectly styled it could survive a tornado, driving a white Escalade that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Recent transplant from Atlanta, married to some developer whose business cards probably just said, "Destroyer of Rural Life." This woman got elected HOA president within 6 months of moving in, campaigning like she was running for supreme dictator of suburbia. Her platform? Property aesthetics and neighborhood standards enforced with the enthusiasm of a zealot and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The first attack came on a Tuesday morning that started peaceful and went sideways fast. Bethany clicked up my driveway in designer heels, completely wrong for farm ground, but I guess intimidation doesn't require practical footwear. She carried a clipboard like it was Excalibur, and she was the chosen queen of paperwork warriors. "Mr. Morrison," she announced, handing me an official-looking violation notice. "This antique machinery disrupts the visual harmony of our community." She was talking about my grandfather's 1952 John Deere tractor, a machine that still ran better than most modern equipment and had more character in its rusty exhaust pipe than her entire development. Then she claimed our barn's metal roof created an aesthetic emergency requiring immediate correction. The woman actually used the phrase architectural terrorism to describe a building that had weathered every storm Tennessee could throw at it for 8 decades. The nuclear option? $500 in daily fines until we achieved what she called full compliance with community vision standards. When I pointed out that our farm had been feeding this community 80 years before her HOA kingdom existed, she just smiled that practiced smile politicians use right before they stab you in the ballot box. I spent that night researching agricultural protections and grandfather clause laws until my eyes felt like they'd been sandblasted. The HOA covenant had some interesting language about agricultural exemptions, but the wording seemed deliberately vague, like someone had crafted loopholes they planned to exploit later. Being a reasonable person, I tried diplomacy first. Called Bethany, suggested we meet face-to-face and work this out like adults who share the same zip code. Her response? Treating me like some backwoods hillbilly who couldn't possibly understand concepts like property values and community enhancement. My neighbor Dolores, Sweet 70-year-old who'd lived next to our farm since Nixon was president pulled me aside after witnessing one of Bethany's performances. With the wisdom that comes from watching small-town politics for decades, she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "That woman's got connections at City Hall, honey. This isn't just HOA power games, she's playing for something bigger." The stakes hit me like a freight train. This farm was my only income after the divorce settlement cleaned out everything except my work ethic and my grandfather's debt. Maple had fallen in love with farm life, gathering warm eggs every morning, brushing our gentle giants, learning that real work builds real character. We still had medical bills from Grandpa's final illness that weren't going anywhere, and hiring a lawyer for extended warfare. I might as well have asked NASA for a moon vacation. But Bethany Clearwater had made one crucial miscalculation about rural families. We might be polite, we might try reason first, but when someone threatens what 3 generations built with their own hands, we don't roll over and play dead. We get creative, we get organized, and we sure as hell don't give up without a fight that'll make the local news. Bethany wasn't content to let sleeping farmers lie. 2 weeks after her first violation notice, she escalated like a Karen who'd discovered the manager's personal phone number and his home address. She filed a formal complaint with county code enforcement, claiming our farm violated something called residential density requirements. Apparently a fancy way of saying too many animals were living too close to her precious suburban paradise. The timing, absolutely diabolical. She scheduled the inspection for Maple's 12th birthday party because nothing says neighborly spirit like traumatizing a kid on her special day. The inspector who showed up was her brother-in-law Dale, a coincidence about as believable as finding a unicorn in your garage. This guy rolled up in a county truck with an attitude that screamed verdict already decided, carrying a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets and wearing the kind of smug expression that makes hermits seem like social butterflies. Picture this nightmare. 20 kids running around our yard, balloons dancing in the breeze, the sweet smell of vanilla birthday cake mixing with hay dust while Maple's friends giggled at our gentlest mare. Then Dale crashes the party like the world's worst surprise guest, ready to steal childhood joy one citation at a time. "These chicken coops," he announced with theatrical authority that would have impressed Shakespeare, "appear to be unpermitted structures violating current residential building codes." He was condemning coops my grandfather built in the 1960s, structures that had weathered more storms than Dale had probably seen weather reports. Here's where Bethany's master plan hit a brick wall built from my grandfather's obsessive record-keeping. See, Grandpa taught me that paperwork beats personalities every single time, and the day after inheriting this place, I'd spent a marathon session in the county courthouse basement, digging through archives older than bell-bottom jeans. Those permits were filed away like buried treasure, just waiting for the right moment. When I produced those original building permits, documents so old they felt like ancient scrolls but carried the legal weight of Mount Rushmore, Dale's confident expression crumbled faster than a cookie in milk. The man actually started stuttering, trying to explain how structures built to 1960s standards somehow violated codes they'd been grandfathered under for decades. But I wasn't done playing defense. During my courthouse treasure hunt, I'd stumbled across something delicious about Bethany's perfect suburban castle. That gorgeous pool deck she constantly flaunted on social media, the one where she hosted HOA meetings while sipping wine and plotting against hardworking farmers, completely unpermitted, built without a single inspection, and clearly exceeding every setback requirement in the book. My counter-complaint hit her mailbox the next morning like a legal boomerang, complete with photographs and measurements that would make a surveyor proud. Turns out Mrs. Community Standards had been living in violation of the very rules she loved weaponizing against others. Irony so thick you could spread it on toast. Maple asked me that evening, with the kind of innocent wisdom only kids possess, why the mean lady hates our chickens so much. I explained that sometimes people use rules as weapons when they can't win through honest conversation, a life lesson I prayed she'd never need but suspected she would. Dolores appeared the next day carrying homemade apple pie and gossip hotter than fresh-baked bread. Apparently Bethany's developer husband had been making rounds at City Hall, smooth-talking about development opportunities and maximizing land use potential in our neck of the woods. The puzzle pieces were clicking together, and the picture looked like a land grab disguised as community improvement. My grandfather always said that when dealing with government inspectors, you collect documentation like a pack rat and photograph everything like a crime scene investigator. He'd learned the hard way that inspectors' memories become surprisingly foggy when lawyers start asking pointed questions, but cameras don't lie and paper trails don't forget. Dale slithered away that afternoon without issuing a single citation, his tail between his legs and his authority deflated like a punctured balloon. But I could practically see the gears grinding in his head. Bethany had played her enforcement card and lost, which meant she'd be hunting for bigger weapons. Sure enough, 2 days later, my mailbox contained a notice about an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for the following week. The agenda listed exactly one item: addressing immediate community safety concerns regarding non-compliant agricultural operations threatening property values and resident welfare. The woman was doubling down harder than a Vegas gambler on his last hand, and something told me her next move would make this inspection comedy look like a gentle warm-up act. Bethany's emergency HOA meeting was shadier than a back-alley poker game and twice as rigged. She scheduled it for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, peak dinner time when working families are wrestling kids into pajamas, and somehow accidentally forgot to notify half the neighborhood, particularly every farmer and blue-collar worker who might have had the audacity to support our side. The meeting location? Her own living room, naturally, because nothing screams official community business like conducting legal proceedings next to your wine collection and vacation photos from Cabo. When I walked in, the air reeked of expensive vanilla candles trying to mask the stench of corruption, and the deck was stacked tighter than a casino owner's favor. Bethany had packed her suburban palace with transplants who viewed our heritage farm like urbanites view roadkill, something unpleasant that needed immediate removal. These people probably bought farm-fresh eggs at Whole Foods for $8 a dozen while complaining about actual farms existing near their McMansions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bethany proclaimed from behind her dining room table like some self-appointed Supreme Court justice, crystal chandelier casting dramatic shadows across her artificially concerned expression. "We face an unprecedented health and safety crisis threatening our community's well-being and property values." She was describing our gentle chickens like they harbored biological weapons instead of laying the freshest eggs this side of paradise. The performance would have won awards for creative fiction if it wasn't so obviously calculated to steal our livelihood. The room nodded with cult-like synchronization. Mrs. Patterson claimed our rooster's dawn calls caused severe psychological trauma. Apparently 4 decades of suburban silence had made her forget that farms produce food and food animals make noise. Mr. Jenkins worried that agricultural particulates might trigger his delicate allergies, completely ignoring that he'd moved next to working farmland voluntarily. Then Bethany dropped her atomic bomb, a motion to assess our property $50,000 in special community improvement fees for remediation of agricultural nuisances and restoration of neighborhood aesthetic harmony. $50,000, more than most honest families earn in a year, to solve problems that existed only in her suburban nightmare fantasies. Here's where her choreographed circus hit a legal brick wall. I'd been sitting quietly in the back corner, phone recording every procedural violation while she trampled more rules than a toddler in a toy store. My grandfather taught me that patience beats panic every time, and sometimes the smartest move is letting bullies hang themselves with their own rope. When the voting charade began, I stood up and asked one beautifully simple question. "Could you please confirm we have the required quorum for this assessment vote?" The room went silent as a morgue at midnight. Bethany shuffled through papers like she was hunting for the Holy Grail, her composed mask cracking to reveal raw panic underneath. See, during my courthouse research sessions, I'd memorized Tennessee HOA laws like scripture. Special assessments over $1,000 require supermajority votes with at least 75% of homeowners present or represented by written proxy. They had maybe 40% of the neighborhood in that room and 0 legitimate proxies. The vote was about as legal as printing your own money, and everyone with half a brain knew it. But I wasn't finished dismantling her kangaroo court. While Bethany scrambled to salvage her sinking ship, I produced my second weapon, a formal demand for complete HOA financial records and meeting minutes spanning 2 years. My grandfather always said knowledge is power, but documented knowledge is nuclear power, and Tennessee sunshine laws guarantee every homeowner access to community books. "I'm also requesting an independent audit of all expenditures," I announced, watching color drain from Bethany's face faster than water from a broken dam, particularly payments to companies owned by board members or their families. That's when eagle-eyed pattern recognition kicked in. The financial summary she'd been waving around like evidence contained multiple large payments to Clearwater Development, LLC. Same last name as our HOA dictator. Either the universe loved coincidences more than lottery winners, or Bethany had been funneling community money to her husband's construction company. The meeting imploded like a controlled demolition. Board members suddenly remembered urgent appointments with babysitters and early bedtimes. Mrs. Patterson's casserole miraculously needed immediate attention. Even Mr. Jenkins developed emergency dog-walking responsibilities that couldn't wait another minute. Bethany tried maintaining authority while desperation rolled off her like cheap cologne in summer heat. "This meeting is adjourned pending legal review," she declared. Fancy language for "we're caught red-handed and need professional damage control." Maple waited up past her bedtime, eager for battle reports from the grown-up war. I explained that sometimes the best strategy against bullies is forcing them to follow their own rules, something they rarely bother learning because they assume nobody will challenge their authority. Buck stopped by next morning with coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and a grin wider than the Mississippi River. Small-town gossip travels faster than wildfire, and apparently half the county was laughing about Bethany's spectacular legal faceplant. But his warning sobered me quickly. Cornered animals get vicious before they surrender, and desperate people abandon pretense for pure aggression. Within 48 hours, unfamiliar vehicles appeared across from our property like vultures circling roadkill. Guys in cheap suits photographed everything and scribbled notes with the intensity of federal investigators. Bethany had graduated from amateur harassment to professional intimidation tactics. The woman was escalating faster than a space shuttle launch, and instinct told me her next assault would make this failed meeting look like a polite disagreement between reasonable neighbors. The guys in cheap suits were just Bethany's opening act, her warm-up before the main event that would make circus performers jealous. Within a week, she'd hired secure community services to patrol our farm perimeter like we were manufacturing meth instead of growing the county's best heirloom tomatoes. These rent-a-cops materialized in matching polo shirts and clipboards, claiming authority under neighborhood watch provisions that existed only in Bethany's alternate reality legal handbook. They parked white SUVs at strategic points around our property, photographing every visitor like paparazzi stalking celebrities. Except our celebrities were customers buying eggs and seasonal vegetables. The acrid smell of their diesel exhaust mixing with morning dew created this toxic perfume that reminded me daily how far we'd fallen down Bethany's rabbit hole of suburban insanity. These guys would idle for hours, engines running, watching our horses graze with the intensity of Secret Service agents protecting nuclear launch codes. My longtime customers started fleeing faster than tourists from a hurricane warning. Mrs. Chen, who'd bought our heritage tomatoes religiously for 3 years, got interrogated about her suspicious agricultural transactions like she was smuggling contraband instead of purchasing the finest produce this side of heaven. When they started issuing official-looking trespassing warnings to grandmothers buying eggs for Sunday baking, I knew we'd crossed from harassment into full-scale economic terrorism. Here's where amateur detective work paid off better than lottery tickets. A little digging revealed that Secure Community Services was owned by Marcus Webb, business partner to Bethany's developer husband and recipient of those mysterious HOA payments I'd uncovered. What are the odds? About the same as finding honest politicians at a campaign fundraiser. But farmers don't survive 3 generations without learning that preparation beats panic, and documentation trumps desperation every time. I installed security cameras covering all public areas around our property, perfectly legal surveillance that captured every harassment incident with courtroom-quality clarity. My grandfather always said the best defense against liars is an honest recording, and modern technology makes that easier than milking cooperative cows. The footage revealed harassment patterns so organized they could have been choreographed by military strategists. These security goons rotated shifts with Swiss watch precision, followed detailed scripts, and documented everything like they were building federal racketeering cases instead of terrorizing a family farm. Dolores proved worth her weight in gold-plated legal advice when she casually dropped her professional background during one of Maple's egg-collecting expeditions. 30 years at the county assessor's office had given this sweet grandmother insider knowledge that would embarrass real estate attorneys. "What they're doing isn't just harassment, honey," she explained while watching guards block another customer's vehicle. "Private security can't legally detain people on public roads or restrict access to legitimate businesses. That's false imprisonment, a felony that carries serious prison time." My daughter had transformed into Nancy Drew with a smartphone, tracking license plates and maintaining incident logs with dedication that would impress professional investigators. Watching a 12-year-old master documentation techniques that most adults never learn made me proud and heartbroken simultaneously. No kid should need these skills. Buck arrived with cavalry in the form of Jasmine Rodriguez, an agricultural law specialist whose reputation for destroying corporate bullies was legendary throughout farming communities. This woman had dismantled megacorporations like a mechanic tearing down broken engines, turning David versus Goliath stories into legal precedents. Farm Fresh Friday events became our counter-offensive against Bethany's propaganda war, inviting neighbors to witness our operation firsthand, watching families enjoy gentle animals while security thugs lurked outside like prison guards, created optics that even suburbanites couldn't ignore. Nothing quite destroys health hazard narratives like children safely petting horses. Local newspaper editor Sarah Martinez showed up during one Friday gathering, camera ready and reporter instincts blazing. She'd been tracking this situation for weeks, sensing bigger stories hiding beneath neighborhood disputes. When she photographed security guards intimidating families with young children, her journalistic fury reached nuclear levels. The harassment campaign backfired more spectacularly than New Coke when footage of guards bullying elderly customers went viral on local social media. Public sympathy for intimidated grandmothers buying farm eggs generated outrage that would have made political consultants weep with joy. But I could feel Bethany's desperation growing like storm clouds on summer horizons. Her legal maneuvers had failed, HOA power plays collapsed, and public opinion was turning against her faster than milk in August heat. Cornered predators don't retreat gracefully. They usually launch one final devastating assault. My surveillance equipment captured increased activity that looked less like security patrols and more like military reconnaissance. More vehicles, extended shifts, aggressive behavior suggesting Bethany was preparing nuclear warfare instead of neighborhood negotiation. Every farming instinct inherited from 3 generations of stubborn survivors warned me that her next move would abandon all pretense of legality for pure, overwhelming force designed to end this conflict permanently. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, Dolores rifling through old files in her spare bedroom like an archaeological expedition through bureaucratic history. This woman had kept copies of every significant county document from her 3-decade career, organized with the precision of a Swiss banker and the foresight of someone who understood that paper trails eventually reveal ugly truths. "Ezra, honey," she called me over one evening, her voice carrying that particular excitement reserved for major discoveries. "You need to see what I found buried in these 2023 land transfer records." Spread across her dining room table like evidence from a crime scene were photocopied documents that painted a picture darker than midnight in a coal mine. Bethany's husband hadn't just bought random properties around our area. He'd systematically acquired surrounding farmland through a web of shell companies with names like Tennessee Agricultural Holdings, LLC, and Rural Heritage Development Corp. The pattern emerged like a jigsaw puzzle assembled by someone with infinite patience and evil intentions. Every property purchase positioned his holdings in a perfect circle around heritage farms, including ours. Development plans hidden in county filing cabinets revealed his ultimate vision: luxury subdivision called Pastoral Meadows Estates, with our farm converted into a community amenity space. Fancy language for stealing our livelihood to create a centerpiece for his suburban kingdom. But the real smoking gun lay buried in email chains that Dolores had somehow acquired through her network of retired county employees. Messages between Bethany, her husband, and County Commissioner Harold Fitzpatrick discussed the problem property situation with the casual callousness of people planning weekend barbecues instead of destroying family legacies. "Once we eliminate the agricultural eyesore," one email read, "property values should increase 40 to 60% across the development zone. Conservative projections show $12 million profit margin within 18 months of acquisition." $12 million. That's what our family's heritage was worth to these vultures, not the 80 years of soil improvement, not the 3 generations of sustainable farming practices, not the community relationships built through honest work and quality products. Just raw profit extracted from rural destruction. The scope of corruption made my head spin like a carnival ride designed by sadists. This wasn't petty HOA tyranny driven by suburban control issues. This was coordinated real estate fraud involving county officials, shell companies, and systematic harassment campaigns designed to force below-market property sales. Other heritage farms throughout the county were experiencing similar pressure. The Patterson Ranch had received surprise tax assessments that tripled their annual burden. Miller's Organic Dairy faced sudden environmental compliance investigations despite operating cleanly for decades. Every targeted property shared one common thread: prime development potential for Bethany's husband's expansion plans. The harassment campaign suddenly made perfect sense through this lens of organized crime. Every violation notice, every security patrol, every HOA meeting designed to create unbearable pressure that would force desperate farmers to sell quickly and cheaply rather than fight prolonged legal battles they couldn't afford. Federal mail fraud charges seemed inevitable when examining the evidence: pattern of deception, interstate shell companies, systematic use of postal services to further criminal enterprises. RICO racketeering allegations practically wrote themselves when documenting coordinated efforts involving multiple conspirators working toward common illegal goals. Maple asked if we'd lose the farm like great-grandpa had feared during the Great Depression, her young voice carrying worry that no child should bear. I promised we'd fight with everything we had, but privately felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of corruption we were facing. This wasn't David versus Goliath. This felt more like David versus Goliath's entire extended family, their lawyers, and half the local government. Buck confirmed similar pressure on his cattle ranch when we shared Dolores's discoveries. Development interests had been circling his property like buzzards, making unsolicited offers while simultaneously filing nuisance complaints about agricultural odors and livestock noise. But Dolores had one more surprise that would change everything. "You might want to check that mail from the county more carefully," she suggested with a mysterious smile that reminded me of my grandmother sharing family secrets. "That appointment letter might be more useful than you realize." I'd been so focused on defending against attacks that I'd barely glanced at routine government correspondence. But buried in the stack of county notices was an official appointment letter that would shift this entire power dynamic in ways Bethany couldn't possibly anticipate. Sometimes the universe provides exactly the weapons you need precisely when you need them most. The appointment letter sat on my kitchen table like a loaded weapon I'd forgotten I owned. Interim Land Use Commissioner, a position I'd applied for months ago and completely forgotten about in the chaos of fighting Bethany's harassment campaign. The irony was sweeter than fresh honey. The woman trying to destroy my farm had no idea I now held authority over every development permit and zoning appeal in the county, including her husband's entire empire. Jasmine Rodriguez practically purred when I showed her the letter during our strategy meeting. "This changes everything," she said, spreading legal documents across my dining room table like a general planning military campaigns. "You're not just defending your property anymore. You're positioned to investigate and potentially halt their entire operation." Buck arrived with a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead and enthusiasm that could power small cities. "You realize what this means?" he grinned, slapping the appointment letter. "Every permit they need, every zoning variance, every development approval has to cross your desk. They've been playing chess while you've been handed the nuclear codes. The Heritage Farm Coalition assembled in my barn like a war council of agricultural resistance fighters. Local farmers who'd been suffering similar harassment brought evidence, documentation, and decades of combined wisdom about fighting corporate land grabs. The smell of hay and determination mixed with diesel exhaust from trucks parked outside created this atmosphere of rural solidarity that would have made my grandfather proud. Dolores connected us with her network of retired county employees, people who remembered when government served communities instead of developers. These folks had witnessed corruption cycles before and knew exactly where bodies were buried in bureaucratic graveyards. Former surveyor Jim Martinez brought original property maps showing how shell company purchases violated historical easements and water rights. Our legal strategy crystallized around Tennessee's Agricultural Protection Act, which provides federal civil rights protections for heritage farming operations facing discriminatory harassment. Jasmine explained that systematic campaigns to force agricultural land sales through intimidation and false regulatory pressure constituted federal violations worth triple damages under civil rights statutes. "Here's something most people don't know," Jasmine said while organizing evidence files. "When HOAs primarily benefit private development interests instead of genuine community welfare, they lose their tax-exempt status and face potential fraud charges. Your documentation of payments to Bethany's husband's companies could trigger IRS investigations that make federal prosecutions look gentle." The financial warfare component involved challenging every aspect of their shell company network. Corporate filings revealed address irregularities, fictitious business registrations, and accounting discrepancies that screamed money laundering to anyone with basic forensic training. We'd request audits, demand transparency, and force them to justify every suspicious transaction under oath. Meanwhile, Maple had organized her school friends into an unofficial surveillance network that would have impressed intelligence agencies. These kids rode bicycles around the county, photographing suspicious activities and documenting harassment incidents with the dedication of junior FBI agents. Social media campaigns using hashtags like #SaveHeritageFarms and #StopFarmBullies were spreading faster than wildfire through rural communities. The PR campaign framed our story as corporate greed versus family tradition, David fighting Goliath with documentation instead of slingshots. Sarah Martinez from the local newspaper committed to an investigative series highlighting heritage farm preservation and exposing development corruption. Regional agricultural magazines picked up the story, creating pressure that would reach state agricultural departments and federal oversight agencies. Buck coordinated crowdfunding for legal expenses through farming communities across multiple states. Turns out, our battle resonated with rural families nationwide who'd faced similar corporate pressure campaigns. Donations poured in from strangers who understood that losing heritage farms meant losing pieces of American agricultural history. Resource gathering accelerated like a well-oiled machine. Volunteer networks for document review, research assistance, and media coordination emerged organically from farming communities that had been waiting decades for someone to fight back effectively against development corruption. Retired lawyers, former government employees, and agricultural advocates rallied around our cause with enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. The technical preparation involved mastering my new commissioner powers while maintaining absolute ethical standards. I'd recuse myself from any decisions directly affecting my property, instead appointing independent review panels that couldn't be accused of bias or conflict of interest. Every action would be transparent, documented, and legally bulletproof. But the real power shift came when I realized Bethany's husband needed my approval for every aspect of his development projects. Zoning variances, environmental impact assessments, infrastructure permits, everything required commissioner authorization that now rested in hands belonging to the farmer they'd been trying to destroy. The universe has a sense of humor darker than midnight coffee and twice as satisfying. Word travels faster than gossip in small towns, and news of my commissioner appointment hit Bethany like a freight train loaded with karma and cosmic justice. Within 24 hours, she'd discovered through county courthouse chatter that the farmer she'd been terrorizing now held authority over her husband's entire development empire. Her reaction was more spectacular than 4th of July fireworks and twice as explosive. Bethany launched a smear campaign that would have impressed political mudslinging consultants, claiming unprecedented conflict of interest and abuse of governmental power before I'd even made a single official decision. She flooded local social media with posts about corruption and cronyism, apparently forgetting that glass houses make poor platforms for throwing stones. The irony burned hotter than summer asphalt. A woman who'd been using HOA positions to harass farmers for her husband's profit was now lecturing others about ethical violations. But desperate people rarely recognize their own hypocrisy, and Bethany was nothing if not desperately committed to stealing our land. Her sabotage campaign escalated beyond harassment into outright warfare. Anonymous complaints flooded the state agriculture department, claiming our farm violated every regulation from livestock housing to organic certification standards. These weren't random grievances. Someone with inside knowledge was filing specific, detailed accusations designed to trigger expensive investigations and compliance reviews. Then our irrigation system started failing in ways that defied mechanical logic. Pumps that had run reliably for decades suddenly developed mysterious electrical problems. Water lines that had never leaked began springing holes overnight. The smell of diesel fuel appeared in our pond one morning, suggesting deliberate contamination that could have killed our fish and ruined our organic certification. Our customer vehicles started receiving parking tickets when visiting the farm, despite parking on private property where county enforcement had no jurisdiction. The tickets were bogus, but fighting them required time and money that most customers couldn't afford. Bethany was systematically destroying our customer base through bureaucratic terrorism. But here's where her desperation created fatal mistakes. The state agriculture inspector who showed up for a surprise visit turned out to be Danny Rodriguez, my old college roommate who'd gone into agricultural compliance after graduation. Danny took one look around our operation, then pulled me aside with a grin that could have powered small cities. "Ezra, this complaint is pure fiction," he said while photographing our immaculate facilities. "Whoever filed this has never seen a real farm violation. This reads like someone Googled agriculture regulations and threw random accusations at a wall hoping something would stick." Danny's investigation revealed patterns that screamed coordinated harassment rather than legitimate regulatory concerns. The complaints contained technical language errors that suggested they'd been written by lawyers rather than farmers, and the timing coincided perfectly with Bethany's other escalation tactics. Meanwhile, I used my new commissioner authority strategically and ethically. Instead of making decisions that could appear retaliatory, I appointed an independent review panel to evaluate all pending development permits in the county. 3 retired judges, 2 environmental scientists, and an agricultural economist would review every application with fresh eyes and zero political pressure. The panel's first action was requesting comprehensive environmental impact studies for all major development projects, including detailed assessments of agricultural displacement, water table effects, and traffic impact on rural communities. Suddenly, Bethany's husband faced months of expensive studies and potential delays that could derail his entire timeline. Bethany's panic manifested in increasingly erratic behavior that made reality TV drama queens look dignified. She started showing up at my property line, screaming accusations about corruption, while my security cameras captured every unhinged moment. These weren't strategic harassment campaigns. This was someone losing control of both her plans and her sanity. The criminal investigation into our pond contamination yielded forensic evidence that diesel fuel had been deliberately introduced through our water intake system. Sheriff's deputies found tire tracks and footprints suggesting nighttime sabotage, and chemical analysis revealed fuel additives that matched samples from Marcus Webb's construction equipment. Community support rallied like antibodies fighting infection. Local church groups organized prayer vigils for threatened farmers. The Veterans Organization provided volunteer security patrols that discouraged further sabotage attempts. Our county school district requested educational tours that brought hundreds of families to witness our operation firsthand, generating goodwill that no amount of Bethany's propaganda could overcome. But the real game changer came when FBI preliminary inquiries escalated into active investigations. Federal agents had been tracking shell company networks and suspicious financial transfers for months, and our documentation provided missing pieces to puzzles they'd been assembling. Mail fraud allegations were just the beginning. RICO racketeering charges loomed like storm clouds on legal horizons. State ethics commissioners launched formal investigations into County Commissioner Fitzpatrick's relationship with development interests. Those email chains Dolores had uncovered became evidence in potential criminal proceedings that could result in federal prison sentences. The local prosecutor was considering multiple charges against whoever contaminated our pond. Environmental crimes carry serious penalties, especially when they target organic farming operations that serve community food security. Bethany's empire was crumbling faster than ancient architecture in earthquakes, but cornered predators often choose scorched earth tactics over graceful surrenders. Every instinct warned me that her final assault would abandon all pretense of civilization for pure, devastating force designed to end this conflict through overwhelming brutality. The calm before this storm felt ominous as winter fog rolling across frozen fields. Bethany's final gambit arrived at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with the subtlety of a nuclear explosion and twice the devastation potential. I woke to earth-shaking vibrations that rattled windows and sent our horses into panic mode, the unmistakable rumble of heavy machinery moving with military precision across terrain that had known only tractors and gentle hoofbeats for 8 decades. 10 bulldozers formed a perfect siege formation around our farm, blocking every gate, every road, every possible escape route with yellow steel barriers that transformed our heritage property into an agricultural prison. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust mixed with morning mist created this toxic fog that burned eyes and lungs while hydraulic systems hissed like mechanical serpents preparing to strike. Standing at the epicenter of this mechanized apocalypse was Bethany Clearwater, clutching a megaphone like some deranged field marshal commanding forces in a war against common decency. Her perfectly styled hair looked almost comical against the backdrop of industrial destruction, but her voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally abandoned all pretense of civilization. By emergency order of the Whispering Pines Estates Health and Safety Committee, she announced through crackling speakers that echoed across our trapped acres. This property is under immediate quarantine due to confirmed agricultural health violations requiring urgent remediation. The performance was pure theater designed for maximum psychological impact. She'd hired Marcus Webb's construction company to provide the bulldozers and operators, creating this elaborate show of force that looked official enough to fool casual observers while being completely illegal under any rational interpretation of law. Our livestock were trapped without access to distant water sources, a situation that constituted animal cruelty under state statutes and could have triggered emergency intervention from agricultural authorities if Bethany's plan had succeeded. Chickens fled in panic while our gentle horses circled their paddock, eyes wide with terror at the mechanical monsters surrounding their peaceful world. But here's where Bethany's desperation blinded her to fatal tactical errors. Instead of conducting this operation quietly, she decided to live-stream the entire spectacle on social media, apparently believing that public documentation would legitimize her actions rather than providing perfect evidence for criminal prosecution. I remained calm as winter morning air while chaos erupted around our farm, channeling 3 generations of agricultural wisdom that taught patience and preparation over panic and reaction. My security cameras were capturing everything from multiple angles while I calmly dialed authorities and documented this unprecedented assault on property rights. Maple emerged from the house with her smartphone, immediately beginning her own live stream that would soon go viral beyond our wildest imagination. This 12-year-old citizen journalist started interviewing our trapped animals with commentary that mixed childhood innocence with sharp observations about injustice that would melt hearts nationwide. "The mean lady has trapped our horses so they can't get water," Maple explained to her growing online audience, her voice carrying moral clarity that adults often lose. "She says it's for safety, but you can see how scared they are. This isn't safety. This is being mean to animals who never hurt anybody." Dolores coordinated our response from her decades of county connections, making phone calls that would bring cavalry riding over hills like something from Western movies. Her network of retired officials, current employees, and community leaders started mobilizing resources that would turn Bethany's siege into the worst public relations disaster in county history. Buck arrived with a convoy of supporting farmers despite the bulldozer blockade, parking trucks along public roads and creating a counter-demonstration that attracted more attention than Bethany had bargained for. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were agricultural allies defending principles that extended far beyond our individual property lines. Jasmine Rodriguez was already filing emergency restraining orders via phone while documenting federal violations that would make prosecutors salivate with anticipation: false imprisonment, animal cruelty, obstruction of commerce, interference with federal agricultural programs. The charges were accumulating faster than storm clouds in tornado season. The sheriff's department received formal complaints about illegal detention and animal welfare violations, while state agriculture commissioners were alerted to livestock emergencies that demanded immediate intervention. Federal investigators monitoring our case suddenly had escalation documentation that transformed preliminary inquiries into active criminal investigations. Meanwhile, neighbors gathered outside the bulldozer perimeter with signs, cameras, and coffee that created this impromptu festival atmosphere, celebrating rural solidarity against corporate tyranny. Local TV news crews arrived after social media alerts, transforming Bethany's private intimidation campaign into a public spectacle that would define her legacy. Church groups brought snacks and moral support, while veterans organizations threatened direct action if our animals suffered harm from this mechanized hostage situation. The community response demonstrated that attacking one heritage farm meant declaring war against rural values that ran deeper than limestone bedrock. Evidence compilation reached courtroom quality standards as multiple camera angles documented false emergency claims, illegal detention tactics, and premeditated conspiracy involving construction companies, HOA funds, and coordinated harassment campaigns spanning months of systematic abuse. The setup for our climactic confrontation was perfect. Witnesses, media coverage, law enforcement response, and overwhelming evidence of criminal conspiracy all converging like tributaries flowing into a river of justice that would sweep away corruption faster than spring floods. The cavalry arrived in waves like something from an epic western, except instead of horses we had sheriff's cruisers, animal welfare officers, county prosecutors, and FBI agents descending on Bethany's mechanized siege with the fury of justice finally unleashed. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped out of his patrol car, surveying the bulldozer fortress with the expression of someone who'd seen stupidity before but never quite at this industrial scale. Behind him, animal welfare officers emerged carrying cameras and clipboards while local TV news crews went live, broadcasting this spectacular meltdown to audiences who'd been following our David versus Goliath saga for weeks. The morning air crackled with tension thicker than humidity before thunderstorms. Diesel fumes mixed with the metallic taste of adrenaline while Bethany stood center stage in her self-created circus, megaphone in hand, apparently believing she could intimidate an entire law enforcement response team through sheer volume and manufactured authority. "Ma'am," Sheriff Bradley called out with the patient tone reserved for dealing with people having public breakdowns, "we need documentation of this emergency health situation you've declared. County records show no permits for this operation." Bethany's composure cracked like ice under pressure. She shuffled through papers with the desperation of someone hunting for evidence that didn't exist, her perfectly styled facade melting under scrutiny from actual authorities rather than intimidated farmers. "This is a legitimate health emergency!" she shrieked, voice rising to frequencies that made nearby dogs wince. "Agricultural violations threaten community safety and property values." That's when I stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel that had witnessed 3 generations of honest work, carrying the commissioner credentials that would transform this entire confrontation. The crowd of supporters behind media barriers started chanting "Save the Farm," while cameras captured every moment of what would become legendary rural justice. "Sheriff Bradley," I announced with calm authority that carried across the chaos, "as Interim Land Use Commissioner, I'm declaring this property an official agricultural heritage preservation zone under emergency powers granted by Tennessee conservation statutes." The effect was more dramatic than lightning strikes. Bethany's face went white as fresh snow while her husband appeared from behind bulldozers, frantically trying to distance himself from operations that were now clearly criminal rather than cleverly aggressive. But I wasn't finished dismantling their empire. "Furthermore," I continued, producing evidence files that Jasmine had prepared for exactly this moment. "Investigation into development permits for Clearwater Development LLC reveals environmental violations that require immediate suspension of all county approvals pending federal review." The RICO conspiracy evidence came next, financial records showing systematic fraud, shell company networks designed to circumvent regulations, and email chains proving coordinated harassment campaigns targeting multiple heritage farms for illegal acquisition. "These bulldozers represent illegal obstruction of protected agricultural land use," I declared, addressing cameras that would broadcast this moment across agricultural communities nationwide. "I'm ordering immediate removal under emergency commissioner authority." Bethany's meltdown was spectacular enough to power small cities. "This is corruption!" she screamed, apparently forgetting that she was being filmed while admitting to criminal conspiracy. "He's abusing government power to protect his illegal farm operations." Her husband tried grabbing her arm, whispering urgent warnings about lawyers and saying nothing, but Bethany was beyond rational thought. "We were just trying to improve property values by removing agricultural eyesores," she continued, accidentally confessing to the entire harassment campaign on live television. "Ma'am," Sheriff Bradley interrupted with authority that brooked no argument, "you're under arrest for animal cruelty, false imprisonment, and illegal detention." The handcuffs clicking around her wrists created the most satisfying sound in recent memory, while FBI agents began seizing HOA financial records as evidence in federal investigations. The bulldozer operators, suddenly realizing they were accessories to criminal conspiracy rather than legitimate contractors, shut down their machines and started looking for lawyers rather than paychecks. Marcus Webb's construction company would face charges for participating in illegal detention operations without proper permits or authority. County Prosecutor Maria Santos announced criminal investigations into real estate fraud, while federal agents confirmed RICO racketeering charges against the entire conspiracy network. The dominoes were falling faster than autumn leaves in windstorms. Community vindication erupted like celebration fireworks. Neighbors cheered as bulldozers received official orders to vacate, children applauded as our horses finally accessed water sources, and Maple's livestream generated hashtags that spread agricultural justice stories across social media platforms nationwide. Buck led the crowd in singing "This Land is Your Land," while Dolores wiped away tears of relief and vindication. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered, voice carrying emotion that 3 generations of farming families understand without explanation. Jasmine grinned while serving civil lawsuit papers to Bethany's retreating husband, whose development empire now faced federal investigations, environmental violations, and financial fraud charges that would keep lawyers busy for years. Sheriff Bradley tipped his hat with respect earned through standing against corruption. "Good work, Commissioner," he said, words that carried weight beyond simple acknowledgement. The media impact exploded across agricultural and legal communities as this confrontation became case study material for fighting corporate land grabs through documentation, community organizing, and strategic use of legal authority. Social media erupted with #JusticeForFarms hashtags, while agricultural rights organizations cited our victory as landmark precedent for heritage farm protection against development pressure and HOA harassment campaigns. This wasn't just personal vindication, it was rural America fighting back against corporate colonization and winning through preparation, persistence, and community solidarity that runs deeper than limestone bedrock. 6 months later, justice tasted sweeter than fresh honey from our own beehives and twice as satisfying. Bethany pleaded guilty to animal cruelty and illegal detention, paying $50,000 in fines that funded the very agricultural preservation programs she'd tried to destroy. Her husband's development empire crumbled faster than stale cookies, losing every license while facing federal fraud charges that would keep lawyers rich for decades. County Commissioner Fitzpatrick resigned in disgrace when corruption investigations revealed pay-to-play schemes spanning 20 years. The special election brought in Maria Santos, a former teacher who understood that government should serve communities, not corporate interests. Sometimes democracy actually works like those dusty civics textbooks promised. The HOA dissolved unanimously when members discovered they'd been funding Bethany's personal vendetta rather than community improvements. The voluntary neighborhood association that replaced it focuses on potluck dinners and helping elderly neighbors instead of terrorizing farmers. Imagine that revolutionary concept. Our farm bloomed into something that would have made my grandfather weep with pride. Federal grants established the Heritage Farm Education Center, where city kids discover that food doesn't magically appear in grocery stores and vegetables grow in actual dirt. Watching urban children pet horses for the first time creates joy that no amount of money could purchase. The scholarship fund we created has already sent 5 rural students to agricultural colleges, ensuring that generations of farming wisdom continues flowing forward instead of disappearing under concrete. Maple's award-winning essay about standing up to bullies got published nationally, proving that 12-year-olds often understand justice better than adults with law degrees. Dolores became our official farm historian, moving into the guest house permanently and sharing stories that connect past wisdom to present challenges. Bucks Ranch joined our Heritage Valley Cooperative along with 8 other preserved farms, creating a brand that commands premium prices from customers who value authentic agricultural heritage over corporate food products. Our annual Farm Heritage Festival draws thousands of visitors who want real farming experiences instead of Instagram-filtered rural fantasies. Local musicians, craft demonstrations, and educational tours build bridges between urban and rural communities that Bethany's hatred never imagined possible. Save Our Heritage Farms nonprofit has preserved 17 family operations from development schemes across 3 states, proving that organized communities can defeat organized greed when people unite around shared values instead of property value spreadsheets. Agricultural law schools now teach our case as required curriculum, while HOA reform legislation cite our victory as evidence that harassment campaigns targeting heritage properties carry serious legal consequences. The ripple effects extend far beyond our Tennessee valleys, strengthening rural communities nationwide. Combining farming with commissioner duties taught me that government can actually serve people when ethical individuals occupy positions of authority. Maple decided she wants to become an agricultural lawyer like Jasmine, inspired by seeing how legal knowledge protects families from corporate exploitation. The community bonds forged through shared struggle created relationships stronger than any subdivision covenant. We learned that heritage farms aren't obstacles to progress. They're foundations for sustainable futures, honoring both tradition and innovation. Here's what this experience taught me about fighting powerful bullies. They count on isolation, fear, and ignorance to win. But knowledge shared becomes power multiplied. Communities united become unstoppable forces, and heritage defended becomes legacy preserved for future generations. Every sunset over our protected pastures reminds me that some battles are worth fighting regardless of odds. This land belongs to Maple and her children now, secured by law, community solidarity, and the simple truth that families willing to document everything and fight smart can defeat corruption that seems overwhelming. The practical takeaway: keep detailed records, build community alliances, research your legal rights, and never assume bureaucratic bullies understand the laws they claim to enforce. David beats Goliath when David comes prepared with evidence, allies, and unshakable determination. Next week on HOA Stories, I'll tell you about the parking enforcement officer who tried seizing my truck during a community festival, not knowing I'm also the deputy sheriff. That meltdown involved public humiliation so spectacular it made Bethany's bulldozer fiasco look dignified. If you've battled HOA tyrants, corrupt officials, or corporate land grabbers, share your story in the comments. Let's build a community of families who refuse to let bullies steal our heritage and prove that standing together makes us stronger than any force trying to tear us apart. Hit that subscribe button for HOA Stories and ring that notification bell. I've got more tales of ordinary families achieving extraordinary victories against impossible odds, and you don't want to miss how smart preparation beats raw power every single time.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.